Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Hunt. On behalf of the Bovine, I will be your host this afternoon. My pleasure today to introduce our subject, Game-Changing Advancements in Semen Sex Sorting Technology. Our presenter today is Dr. Vish. Uh, uh, Dr. Vish has had a extensive knowledge working worldwide in this technology. He's works for a company that is the leader in this marketplace, and it is our pleasure to have him join us and share some of his experience with us. So with that, I will pass presenter over to Dr. Vish.
Thank you, folks, and thank you, Andrew, for this invitation. And it is my pleasure to be part of this webinar. It's the way technology is going in everything that I do, and it looks like this is another way to present information across a wide variety and a wider audience as well. Anyway, the topic that I've been asked to discuss is really the advancements in sex sorting technology and the evolution of this particular technology and the science behind it as well. So the plan is to go through about 40-45 minutes of presentation and discussion, and after that we can take some questions. Andrew, can everyone see the front page?
We see you're in PowerPoint currently.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Right. I think I should start off a bit at the beginning, really. It was in 1989 that Larry Johnson from the U.S. Department of Agriculture produced this landmark paper. It was an exceptional rapid paper publication and talked about sex pre-selection in rabbits. And this was pretty much the landmark paper that showed for the first time that this technology is a possibility to separate sperm in its gender ratio. And this was done with rabbit sperm at that time. And it was really a very well-constructed experiment where Larry Johnson sorted sperm for the X sperm, which is the female sperm, and then for the Y sperm as well, and then put it together and tested each one of those populations separately to look at the gender ratio. And it followed what was theoretically a separated gender ratio in this case. And he did that with the surgical artificial insemination in the oviduct of rabbits. So this pretty much set the scene, and this scientifically was a landmark development. Going through to the next slide, as in, where does this all start? The sperm has got this genetic package. Each sperm comes completely rolled up with that genetic package, and it's called the DNA. And the principle on which the sperm sorting is through a process called cytometry, and it really exploits the difference between the two of them, that is the X chromosome and the Y chromosome. And as you can see in that picture, it's, there is a significant difference in size between the two. And this really is the main discriminatory feature which we use as technologists to separate the X and the Y sperm. If you look at the bovine sperm chromosome, so each sperm comes, again, as I said, with a payload, with a genetic payload, and that payload contains roughly about 29 what we call as autosomes or chromosomes, and then one sex chromosome. And the sex chromosome, and because the male is the one that determines what the sex of the offspring is going to be, it could contain either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. And if you look at the difference, the chromosome length and the difference between the two is roughly about 3.8% when it comes to the bovine. So this is a difference that's being exploited and used for the separation of the two specific genders, the X and the Y. The next slide shows really the difference in DNA content between the animal species, or the so-called some of the agriculturally relevant species, as well as looking at some of the other mammalian sort of species as well. So if you look at the bovine, it's about 3.8%. In the sheep, it's about 4.1%, the difference, whereas with the monkey, it's 4.2%, and the horse, it's about 4%. If we look just in the bovine, within the bovine environment, both looking at Bos taurus, that is the European breeds, or the Indicus breeds, the Bos indicus. If you look at the Jersey, the Angus, the Hereford, Holstein, and the Brahman, it just shows the differences in DNA and the X and Y difference in DNA content within those breeds. So the Jersey obviously has the highest difference in terms of the XY separations, about 4.22%, and in the Brahman breed, it's about 3.7%. Nonetheless, it is a reasonable difference, which can be sort of used for separating the two subpopulations. So this is at a high level in terms of what each of those breeds come up in terms of their overall DNA concentration within the sperm population. I want to go to a bit of a historical perspective again as to when all this started, so that it puts things in perspective. It puts things in context as to how everything began and where we are today. And we are, significantly ahead today compared to, and that's how technology progresses. So if you look back in 1976, that was when the sperm DNA content was actually discovered. That Barton Gledhill actually wrote the first paper on this one. And subsequently, Dwayne Garner, who also happens to be on our science advisory committee now, he was the one who looked at labeling sperm. He was able to actually devise specific, what we call as vital stains, that would actually enter the sperm through the sperm membrane and then label the DNA. And this was when he first published papers on the differentiation between the X and the Y sperm for livestock. And of course, I showed you the paper that was published by Larry Johnson. He was the one who modified the sperm, modified a cytometer, a flow cytometer, to be made into a specific sperm sorter. And did that first with sorting sperm heads in '87. Of course, he published his paper in '89, and so that's listed out there as well. Go through again, it was the first use of sex-sorted sperm, initially because it was so slow and everything else, that it was used in IVF, or in vitro fertilization, to produce embryos. And in 1993, David Cran was the guy who actually published or showed that this was possible. In 1996, XY Inc. was created with the main aim of taking all this information that was produced in research laboratories as well as academic institutions out into the commercial world. And George Seidel from Colorado State, he first published a paper on the low-dose insemination because it was realized that it was going to be really difficult to sort sperm in reasonable numbers to get the same level of sperm number as what was in artificial insemination. So he first mooted the idea of the low dose insemination, and it was successful to a certain extent. And the fertility was not good at all, but yet it showed that fertility is possible. And then in 1999, successful freezing of sex-sorted sperm happened, and John Schenck did that. In 2002, Sexing Technologies acquired the license and took it up on a war footing to take this into the commercial world. And a substantial amount of time, research money has been expended by Sexing Technologies. And over the last 12, 14 years now, it's come a long way. And then with the also a specialist cytometer company in terms of cytonomicity, sort of contributing towards full automation of the machines. And I will give you a bit more of the detail as we go along. And in 2014, I think it was a bit of a crowning moment for all of us to be able to have Sextra Ultra as a new product come in, which did usher in a new era of sex sorting technology, both in terms of the sperm biochemistry and the way it was performing in the field, as well as new machines. So we'll go through that shortly. Fine. Here's a picture of Larry Johnson and Glenn Welch. They're setting up the old modified Coulter counter. This was when they were working with rabbit and chinchilla sperm. And it was the footprint of that particular machine was quite substantial. I think it was roughly about 10 or 11 feet long and about 6 feet wide, and that took half the room really. So it was quite a bit, and that was only the machine. And then on top of that, the console and everything else was quite a large one too. The next slide really shows how the technology works. In reality, the first cytometer and the principle of the current day cytometer is exactly the same. There is really not a major difference at all. But it's the big thing is really the internal electronics, the speeds, and what happens now. Anyway, what happens is usually the sperm is sort of diluted in a medium, and then it's put through a nozzle, and it's raced through the middle nozzle at roughly about quite significant speeds, 60, 70 miles an hour. And while it's going through, there is a piezoelectric crystal up at the top end that vibrates at about 90,000 times per second and puts sperm into a single file and eventually throws it out into a droplet. But before it enters the droplet, there's a laser that's actually shone into the stream of that sperm. And each sperm is asked the question, are you male or are you female? And the sperm has to answer back. And when it answers back through fluorescence, what happens is that there are detectors on either side that pick up that answer. And then it sends a signal back, and each of those tail end droplets is then given a specific charge. And the charge is that the female sperm has got a negative charge, and the male sperm has got a positive charge. And then there is an electronic or electrical drafting gate at the bottom that just puts it into two separate receptacles. That is the male and the female, and what doesn't get sorted goes through the middle. Now the whole process has gone through, while the process is the same, it is the efficiency of the process that has changed substantially over time in the last decade or so. And I will give you some examples as we go further down. Here's a bit of a summary slide, and the summary slide just shows as to where we were and where we are now in some ways. If you look at the sex sorting technology, the progress through the years, in 1990 to 95, the sort speeds, the way that the sperm was actually going through the machine, was roughly about 200 to 400 cells per second, with about 83% purity and about 70% fertility of conventional. And approximately for every 1,000 conventional straws that you could get through freezing, you'll have about 10 sex, which really was, in terms of an equation, was not attractive at all. But having said that, the evolution of the technology over the last decade or decade and a half has taken it through 1995 to 2002, where the sort speeds have gone up to about 1,000 cells per second. And then from about 2002 to 2012 to about 5,000 cells per second. And progressively each time, the fertility, while has seen a bit of an improvement, it was the efficiency of the process that took place where, 1,000 conventional straws, we could get 56 in about 1995 to 2002. And from 2002 to 2012, we could get about 406 for every 1,000 conventional. In the last 2 years has seen some significant improvement, and it's almost like the perfect storm. Like we've put a lot of effort into the biochemistry or the way that the sperm sort of is stored and that it is processed and so on, and at the same time significant investment in the new machinery, which has really made it extremely fast and has created given lots of options in terms of the efficiency of sorting. So the improvement in sorting technology, this is the Genesis 2 that we're looking at, and gone to about 7,000 to 10,000 cells per second, and we've significantly improved the fertility of compared to conventional semen. It's about 92 to 98%. And the interesting part is for every 1,000 conventional straws that can be produced, we can produce almost equivalent amount of sex straws, if not more. And this is obviously because of a dose rate advantage that sex semen has as well, which will become clear as we go down through the presentation. So the next picture shows just the new machines that we have, and the footprint of these machines is about 1/5 of that of the old machines. They're roughly about 6 foot wide and about 2.5 feet 6 foot long and 2.5 feet wide. And Yeah. So the the footprint of these machines is quite small, and obviously, as I showed you, they are much more efficient and faster than the previous machines as well. So a fair amount of investment and research has gone into these machines. Um, with the next slide, I want to just move the conversation to what we've done with sex sorting, or sorting sperm and the biochemistry as well. The process is called sex culture, and I gave a presentation at the National Association of Artificial Breeders last year, and this is talking about the fertility bar of sex sorted sperm, and that's been the bugbear of sex sorted sperm in the past. In the past, what's been the primary issue with sex sperm? And for those who've been in the business long enough and who've used sex sperm for a long time, sorry, well, clearly remember that fertility had been the major issue as far as sex sorted sperm was concerned. And no matter how you cut it or diced it, sex sorted sperm was lower in fertility compared with the unsorted sperm. And on average, the fertility of sex sorted sperm, it was around 75 to 80% of that of unsorted sperm. So, when you look at it, it didn't matter which way you did the trials, it was always around 75 to 80% of that of conventional sperm. And there's lots of publications that also, supported that point. So in 2010, sex semen conception rate was 75 to 80% of that of conventional semen. And if you increase the dose rate, if you went from 2.1 to 3.5 million, it still didn't make any change. So proportionally, compared to conventional, the sex sorted, and this is by Mel Dejanet, who published this paper, it was still about 74 to 78% of that of conventional sperm. Coming back to the next point, which was, a very common tool that semen companies have is if they find that there is fertility problems or lowered fertility, one of the things that would be done would be to increase the sperm numbers. That is, to increase the sperm numbers per straw. This particular trick was tried with sex sorted sperm as well. But unfortunately, as in increasing sperm numbers did not compensate for the subfertility in the old process, the old XY process. It did not change. So if you look at the sperm concentration, if you increased it from 2.1 to 10 million, and you compared that with either 2.1 million or 10 million, the relative fertility was still 70 to 73% of that of conventional. And there's been many publications that actually, showed the same result with regard to the old process. So what's the educated conclusion based on that old information that we had, based on all the trials that were done in the past? The educated conclusion was that the process of cytometry altered the functional capacity of sperm. That is, it altered the way that the sperm was actually working inside the female reproductive tract and fertilizing. Also talked about possible fertilization failure and possibly early embryonic death as well. But again, the tricks that can normally be used to increase sperm numbers, it did not really alter the probability of fertilization at all. So that was how it was before. Based on all the trials that had been done over a period of about 10, 12 years, and that was where it reached. We've been engaging since sexing technologies sort of acquired the license. We've been engaging in quite a bit of semen biochemistry research, and things did come to a head a few years ago. The point was that perhaps the cause of the diminished functional capacity of sex sorted sperm is because of the very significant number of processes that it goes through during the overall sorting process. So if you look at it, conventional semen just goes through about 2 or 3 small processes before it actually gets frozen and then inseminated into the cow. Whereas sex sorted semen goes through about 21 sub-processes, as it goes to the machine and it gets moved through the machine, and also then finally frozen and then sent across for use. So it is actually quite a significant manipulation of the sperm and so on. So we had to devise methods to keep it in its native state, to keep it sort of alive and well and happy during the entire process. This is a typical sorting profile that I'm showing here, and this is what happens when the sperm actually goes through the machine. It has, if you look on the left-hand side, the sperms sort of in the on one scatter plot, we can actually separate out the dead sperm from the live sperm. And this is one good thing about the sorting process. It actually removes most of the dead sperm, because all the dead sperm are sort of labeled separately. And because of that label, they migrate into a different area of the plot. And therefore, you can put a ring around it and gate it and remove it so that it doesn't come into the sorted population. Now, we can separate out the X and the Y sperm with a remarkable degree of accuracy. Now, in each case, greater than 90% of the accuracy can be maintained with about 7 to 10,000 of each sex. So this is like a typical sorting profile based on now all the new methods and the new labeling techniques and the new sort of biochemistry that we've utilized in our sex sorting process. So what we've done is to improve the sorting process, we've invested in new hardware and software, and that is the new Genesis machine, and also improved the biochemical process involved in the sex sorting itself. And so gone through the entire methodology, and we've changed quite a bit. And this whole thing is called Sexta Ultra, really. That if you look at it, the entire process change that we went through was called Sexta Ultra. I just wanted to take a small diversion. It's called sperm heterogeneity, or when you look at the sperm ejaculate, it's made up of distinct subpopulations. Nature has devised it in such a way that it's got distinct subpopulations. What does it do? Now, the distinct subpopulations in a sperm, package is so that the sperm are ready for fertilization at different times in insemination. So when you put 10 million sperm into the female reproductive tract, it's a bit like the process of undressing and getting ready for fertilization. So the sperm, about 1 million get ready for fertilization immediately, and another, a couple of million get ready for fertilization 6 hours later, and another, 5 million get ready for fertilization 8 hours later, and so on. But what that is it just allows that sperm to live for extended periods in the female reproductive tract. And then as and when the cow is ready and ovulated, that there is viable sperm, or what you call as competent sperm, available for fertilization. Now, this is a well-known theory, and it's called sperm heterogeneity and so on. But what is absolutely important in any of these cases is that the process of heat detection, so that you can maximize the opportunity or the probability of fertilization when heat detection is right and you inseminate at the right time with good techniques and so on. In a strange sort of way, sexing hasn't changed that equation at all. It still needs exactly the same thing to be done, but except that maybe in terms of survival of sperm inside the cow, it's slightly different, but it still hasn't changed the equation, that you still need to be very, very mindful and cognizant of timing of insemination, as well as watching for heat. We did have an observation that potentially that sex sorting sperm might be fertile in a narrow time window and requires optimization of time of insemination and good heat detection. That is correct. But having said that, with the new Sexta Ultra method, it has actually created a reasonable time window for insemination as well, but yet heat detection is absolutely important. So, looking at all the recent progress in terms of sperm biochemistry as well as the machine improvements, we had good success in the laboratory initially, and therefore we decided that we'd go and so what I'm showing now is a bunch of results of both laboratory as well as field trial results. If you look at the open bars, that's the old method, the old XY method, or the old method that we used to process sex-sorted sperm. And the dark bars, or the fully closed bars, where sperm has been processed using the sexed ultra method. And this is just a laboratory estimate, and the laboratory estimates show in terms of motility, that is at 0 hours and 3 hours, in terms of progressive motility at 0 hours and 3 hours, and also what we call as a percent intact acrosomes, which is a morphological test that we do to look at how many of the sperm have got competent acrosomes. So, if they don't have competent acrosomes, they will not be able to fertilize. So given this, we find that in every parameter tested, the sexed ultra was significantly superior to the old XY method. This gave us confidence that, hey, what we've done in the laboratory actually has improved the physical characteristics more than what the old method did. And therefore, this gave us confidence to go and try it out in the field. So this is the first preliminary trials we did with sexed ultra. This was with Jerseys and Holsteins. There were not huge numbers, but overall, we found that the XY method, the old method, we got 47.3% pregnancy rate out of 1,166 inseminations. With the sexed ultra method, we got 54.7% pregnancy rate. So this was almost the first time that a significant lift in fertility had been demonstrated for over a decade of the use of sex-sorted sperm. We weren't counting our chickens yet, because this was still a preliminary trial with sexed ultra. We then went and did a significant trial with select sires, and we had there, it was an organized, sort of a well-designed, and it was designed to test the difference between the old method and the sexed ultra method. This was roughly about 7 sires and semen distributed across about 40 herds, and we had about equal number of inseminations in each one of them, about 3,500. And again, this was it showed that the sexed ultra method improved conception rate by over 5% compared to the old method. This again proved to us that what we were doing was actually a good thing, and that we did have an improvement in fertility with the sexed ultra method. Now that was the sexed ultra method also has gone through a couple of changes. So when we first went through the process, we decided that we tested out the first lot of the sexed ultra, or the sexed ultra process has been through a couple of iterations. The next slide that I'm showing is the new and improved sexed ultra. So we made a few more changes to the sexed ultra method and tested this out with semen that had been processed both in the US and in Canada. And these were roughly about 3,000 inseminations each way, and we got another lift in fertility of roughly about 1.5% or 2% with the new sexed ultra method. So now this is the method that is currently being utilized everywhere. But what is interesting is that we got a primary lift when we moved from the old method to the sexed ultra method, and we changed it from the sexed ultra method to an improved sexed ultra method. We got another lift in fertility as well. So it just went to show that the biochemical changes and all the machine changes that we had made had actually given us that fertility lift. This is pretty much our landmark results that we've had. We did a substantial trial in Germany. We did substantial trials globally, actually, but this was a very well-organized trial. This was the first time we were testing out a dose rate response to see if we had moved from 2.1 million sperm all the way to 4 million, would we have had a lift in fertility? If you recall my previous slides that I showed you, there was no no change in fertility even when dose rate was increased. So, but when we did this trial for the first time ever, we were able to demonstrate that as we increased sperm concentration from 2.1 to 3 to 4 million, that there was an increase in fertility. And this was significantly different, and there were a reasonable number of inseminations in each one of those cells. We tried the XY-old method compared with the sex ultra method, the sex ultra 3, sex ultra 4, and conventional 15 million. And so you can see the results on the side, the 56-day non-return rate. Two important observations in this trial. For the first time, a dose response effect was demonstrated, and also some parity in conception rates with conventional semen has been demonstrated. And this is an important one because of the fact that the bugbear for sex-ordered semen has always been lower conception rates, and there was no parity with conventional. But for quite clearly, we have now shown there is some parity in conception rates with the conventional semen. I just want to take a little diversion as well, because we've done quite a few fresh semen inseminations and some lessons that we've learned from sex-sorted sperm in New Zealand. In New Zealand, it's a bit of a different system. They have quite a large number of inseminations that are conducted in a very short period of time, from the 1st of September till about the end of December. Close to about 4.5 million inseminations are done in about a 16-week period. So we did a bunch of fresh semen inseminations in 2011, 12, and 13. And if you look at it, the sex-ordered semen inseminations on the left-hand side of the table, we've got 8,848 inseminations in 2011, going up to 26,104 inseminations in 2013. And then comparable conventional inseminations as well. The difference in sex-ordered versus conventional non-return rate was roughly about 3.9% on average across the 3 years. And when you normalize that in terms of proportion of conventional, you could see that it's roughly around 94.6, roughly about 95% of that of conventional in terms of performance. And Zhenjiang Zhu from Livestock Improvement collated all these results, and it's since then these results have been published as well. So this was probably the first time that we got an indication that the sex sorting process and the improvements that we had made in the sex ultra had really improved it substantially, and did not affect the quality of sperm as such, and that it was capable of adequate fertility. This was followed on all the way through calving, and yep, the same thing sort of stood up in terms of the fact the difference between sex sorted and conventional was just about 3% difference in terms of actual calving as well. So comparable fertility and very close fertility to that of conventional was demonstrated even with sex sorted sperm. So just as a summary as to where we are in terms of the overall sex ultra process, for the first time there was a marked lift in fertility with sex sorted frozen semen. There was no perceptible loss in fertility with fresh sex sorted semen. The fertility loss we felt was primarily due to the interaction between sex sorting and cryopreservation, and that was why the improvement in sex ultra, where we tightened up all the process and made substantial changes, improved that cryopreservation as well of sex sorting, of sex sorted semen. And for the first time, comparable conception rates for sex sorted sperm and conventional was demonstrated. So, what is different about sex sorted sperm? There is still this belief or possibility that sex sorted sperm might be slightly different to conventional, and that it survives slightly differently inside the female reproductive tract, but nonetheless, the main point is that good heat detection and insemination at the right times makes it a very, very, very well performing product, And I'll give you some data from Australia as well, in both heifers and cows. Now, when we look at it, the time interval between beginning of heat and artificial insemination, usually if you did that, you will get this sort of a smallish peak with conventional sperm, but certainly with sex-ordered sperm, somewhere between 20 to 24 hours, 16 to 20 or 20 to 24 is about the right time in terms of the overall fertile conception rate related to sex-ordered sperm. Got some trial data from Australia with regard to fixed time artificial insemination. This John Kelly from the Warrnambool Vet Clinic shared this information with me. They've been doing sex-ordered semen again, like in the US and elsewhere, for over a decade. But in the last few years, they've actually had some excellent results, and particularly with Sext Ultra. Couple of things that he does say in terms of the use of Sext Ultra semen or sex-sorted semen in general, both with heifers, the importance of a target body weight. He does talk about the fact that moving from a 250 kilogram animal to a 300 kilogram animal, which is sort of the target body weight for a fully grown heifer, is about just changed the performance of sex-sorted semen considerably. I think we should probably go to the next one. They did some trials with fresh sex semen in heifers in 2014. The conception rate, total conception rate was roughly about 55%, which is fantastic. But the old sex semen frozen was 40% conception rate with a range of 26 to 51, and the Sext Ultra was 57% conception rate. And overall, this particular data is going to be also summarized and published very shortly. So this is with the fresh sex heifers. We also got similar results with the fresh sex cows. By its very nature, yes, the cows have been a bit lower in terms of fertility. The overall fertility was about 37% in terms of conception rate. The frozen was about 30% conception rate. The old sex semen frozen, which is the old method, and with the Sext Ultra is 46%. So we're getting data from various quarters around the world now to show that the Sext Ultra process certainly has improved fertility substantially. We've got results. We've also done field trials in Ireland and in France and Germany. And all these cases, we've had results that show that the fertility was about between 93 and 95% of that of conventional semen. We did some dose rate trials as well in France and Germany. And I showed you the journal results, of course, but we did something similar in France as well. And yeah, we got very good fertility results with Sext Ultra. So, just as a tidy up slide, why use sex semen? Obviously, sort of one is the replacements in terms of the selection pressure you can put in terms of the calves that are born, and an opportunity to cull the ones that really don't contribute much to the herd. There is this drive, possibility to drive the herd structure to be a younger animals as well, so that you have the ability to retain the best genetics. And John Kelly sort of put this together to a certain, he said, my farmers certainly look for an extra income stream, is what he said to me. And just put that in terms of the excess heifers and the sale of pregnant late cows as well, particularly if it's in a herd building mode. The important part is, of course, calving ease. We all know that a heifer calf certainly contributes towards calving ease. And of course, a magical result that came from some meta-analysis that Harvard University did in terms of having 2 heifer calves consecutively did increase milk production by about 400 pounds. And and that has been sort of, that was a bit of an interesting observation. And of course, finally, unwanted male calves can be eliminated as well. So in some ways, putting it together, the cornerstone technology to exploit genomic advances in dairy cattle breeding, used for AI, DNA markers, IVF, MOAT, to generate heifer calves from high genomic value parents and to generate bull calves from high genomic value parents. And this really is an excellent cornerstone technology. And it's become mature enough and it's performing well enough to be able to be used as a full-fledged tool in your reproduction toolbox. So I'll stop there and here and the questions, over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, and great for going through all that. I kind of always use the belief that in God we trust and everyone else bring numbers, and so the numbers you're able to share with us sure bring a lot of insight into just what the rates are and how it is going. You hear a lot of talk, but you never hear a lot about the numbers of the conception rates in that way. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Okay. We've had several questions in here. Some of them are similar to each other, so I've kind of merged them in. Quite a few came in through email, so I'm going to work through them. If other people have other questions, I'm continuing to monitor the email questions as well. So if you want to pop them in the chat box, I'll keep an eye on there as we're going through these. But I'll start through the questions we have here. One of the first ones we got is, will we see the conception rate of sex semen past that of conventional, or will we see both of them, conception rates of conventional and sexed, increase significantly in the near future?
Good question. And I think that is a possibility. There is evidence already in another species, in sheep in particular, and Simon de Graaf from Australia published a paper. He called it more the exception rather than the rule, and where sex-sorted sheep semen is more fertile than conventional sheep semen. We've also had, if you look at the dose rate trial results that I showed, Andrew, there is a tendency for sexed ultra as such to actually surpass the conventional fertility as well. It is quite possible that in discrete pockets at certain times of insemination, and if everything were to be right, that sex-sorted semen can actually be a bit more fertile than conventional. Don't have enough evidence to sort of support it 100%, but it is pointing in that direction.
Okay. Next question. Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Next question. Is all the sex semen we see with the different AI companies with different names sexed ultra semen, or are there only certain companies that have this new version of the sexed ultra?
Sexed ultra was introduced globally in about July 2013, I think, and then we moved to the complete version of sexed ultra end of 2013.
But would that be all the AI companies have that version then, or is there only certain ones?
I would think so. All the AI companies would have that.
Okay, cool. Next question. I have heard that sex semen should only be used on virgin heifers. Is this still the case?
No, it's not the case. It certainly can be used on cows as well. But again, as in it is monitoring the heat detection needs to be very accurate. Going slightly later with sex-sorted semen certainly helps. And sexed ultra, this particular technology has certainly. So if you're going to use conventional semen with your cows, there's no reason not to use sex-sorted semen.
Okay, cool. And that links to a next question. I know you went over it a little bit in the slides, but it had come in before you did that. Are there different breeding practices that we should use when using sex semen versus conventional semen?
No more different really, but as long as it's done correctly. We haven't accumulated enough data to show whether going slightly later with sex-sorted semen, but it certainly is pointing in that direction, that going slightly later with sex-sorted semen will help in the overall conception rate. But having said that, with heifers, we sort of seem to get more than adequate fertility, doing it exactly the same way as what we do with conventional semen.
Okay. And then kind of on the same vein, are there any issues or complications when using sex semen for embryo work or also IVF work?
No, I haven't touched on that in this particular presentation, but there are certain sort of I suppose a different set of rules that operate for using it in IVF and so on, and MOAT types of scenarios. I've got some data that I haven't presented, or at least I've got some slides which shows in terms of how to stagger the double insemination and so on. But it is not exactly like conventional AI, obviously, for MOAT and IVF.
Yeah, maybe when that becomes available, you can let us know, and we'll share it with everyone who was attending or watching this webinar, so that they could see that too, because that is a question that I know in other discussions we've been involved in as well. There's been some questions that way. So.
I can put something together in that regard.
Cool, and I appreciate it. So I think with that, I want to thank Dr. Vish for, sorry, I haven't been able to say the last name correctly yet, so I'll stick with Dr. Vishwanath for joining us today. As I said, seeing the numbers, seeing the figures around it, we hear a lot of stories about is sex semen comparable to conventional, and everyone has their own anecdotal data, but you sharing with us the actual metrics on larger scale trials, as well as initiatives and how it's come, certainly opens our eyes to just how close it has come to conventional conception rates. And we do appreciate that. So thank you for presenting to us today.
No problem. My pleasure.
And for everyone who was watching, thank you for joining us today.